Short Stories by O. Henry. 4. The Last Leaf. In a little district west of Washington Square, the streets have run crazy and broken themselves into small strips, called places. These places make strange angles and curves. One street crosses itself a time or two. An artist once discovered a valuable possibility in this street. Suppose a collector, with a bill for paints, paper, and canvas, should in traversing this route suddenly meet himself coming back, without a cent having been paid on account. So to quaint old Greenwich Village the art people soon come prowling, hunting for north windows and 18th-century gables and Dutch attics and low rents. Then they import some pewter mugs and a chafing dish or two from 6th Avenue and make a colony. At the top of a squatty 3-story brick, Sue and Jonesy had their studio. Jonesy was familiar for Joanna. One was from Maine and the other from California. They had met at a hotel of an 8th Street Delmonico's and found their tastes in art, chicory salad, and bishop sleeves so congenial that the joint studio resulted. That was in May. In November, a cold, unseen stranger, whom the doctors called pneumonia, stalked about the colony, touching one here and there with his icy fingers. Over on the east side, the ravager strode boldly, smiting his victims by scores, but his feet trod slowly through the maze of the narrow and moss-grown places. Mr. Pneumonia was not what you would call a chivalrous old gentleman. A mite of a little woman, with blood thinned from California, was hardly fair game for this red-fisted, short-breathed old duffer. But Jonesy he smote, and she lay scarcely moving on her painted iron bedstead, looking through the small Dutch window panes at the blank side of the next brick house. One morning the busy doctor invited Sue into the hallway with a saggy gray eyebrow. "She has one chance in, let's say, 10, he said, as he shook down the mercury in his thermometer. "And that chance is for her to want to live. This way people have of lining up on the side of the undertaker makes the entire doctor profession look silly. Your little lady has made up her mind that she's not going to get well." Has she anything on her mind?" She wanted to paint the Bay of Naples some day," said Sue. "Paint? Bosh! Has she anything on her mind worth thinking about twice? A man, for instance." "A man?" said Sue, with a Jew's harp twang in her voice. "Is a man worth? But no, doctor, there's nothing of that kind." "Well, it is the weakness, then," said the doctor. "I will do all that science, so far it may filter through my efforts, can accomplish. But whenever my patient begins to count the carriages in her funeral procession, I subtract 50% from the curative power of the medication. If you will get her to ask one question about the new winter styles in cloak sleeves, I will promise you a 1 in 5 chance for her, instead of 1 in 10. After the doctor had gone, Sue went into the workroom and cried on a Japanese napkin to a pulp. Then she swaggered into Jonesy's room with her drawing-board whistling ragtime. Jonesy lay scarcely making a ripple under the bedclothes, with her face towards the window. Sue stopped whistling, thinking she was asleep. She arranged her board and began a pen-and-ink drawing to illustrate the magazine story. Young artists must pave their way to art by drawing pictures for magazine stories that young authors write to pave their way to literature. As Sue was scratching a pair of elegant horse-show riding trousers and a monocle on the figure of the hero, an Idaho cowboy, she heard a low sound several times repeated. She went quickly to the bedside. Jonesy's eyes were open wide. She was looking out the window and counting backward. 12, she said, and a little later 11, and then 10, 9, and then 8 and 7 almost together. She looked solicitously out of the window. What was there to count? There was only a bare, dreary yard to be seen, and the blank side of a brick house 20 feet away. An old ivy vine, gnarled and decaying at the roots, climbed halfway up the brick wall. The cold breath of autumn had stricken its leaves from the vine until its skeleton branches clung almost bare to the crumbling bricks. "What is it, dear?" asked Sue. "Sick," said Jonesy, in almost a whisper. "They're falling faster now. 3 days ago there were almost 100. It made my head ache to count them, but now it's easy. There goes another one. There are only 5 left now." "5 what, dear? Tell me." "Leaves on the vine. When the last one falls, I must go too. I've known that for 3 days. Didn't the doctor tell you?" "Oh, I never heard such nonsense," complained Sue with magnificent scorn. "What have old ivy leaves to do with you getting well? And you used to love that vine so, you naughty girl. Don't be a goosey. Why, the doctor told me this morning that your chances for getting well real soon were, let's see, exactly what he said. He said the chances were 10 to 1. Why, that's almost as good a chance as we have in New York when we ride on the streetcar or walk past a new building. Try to take some broth now, and let Studi get back to her drawing, so she can sell the editor man with it, and buy port wine for her sick child and pork chops for her greedy self." "You needn't get any more wine," said Jonesy, keeping her eyes fixed on the window. "There goes another. No, I don't want any broth. That leaves just 4, and I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I'll go too." "Jonesy, dear," said Sue, bending over her, "will you promise me to keep your eyes closed and not look out the window until I'm done working? I must hand those drawings in by tomorrow, and I need the light, or I would draw the shade down." "Couldn't you draw in the other room?" asked Jonesy coldly. "I'd rather be here by you," said Sue. Besides, I don't want you to keep looking at those silly ivy leaves." "Tell me as soon as you've finished," said Jonesy, closing her eyes and laying white and still as a fallen statue, "because I want to see the last one fall. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of thinking. I want to turn loose my hold on everything and go sailing down, down, just like one of those poor tired leaves." "Try to sleep," said Sue. "I must call Bremen up to be my model for the old hermit miner. I'm not be gone a minute. Don't try to move until I come back." Old Bremen was a painter who lived on the ground floor beneath them, and he was past 60 and had a Michelangelo Moses beard curling down from the head of elongated body as an imp. Bremen was a failure in art. 40 years he had wielded the brush without getting near enough to touch the hem of his mistress's robe. He had been always about to paint a masterpiece, but had never yet begun it. For several years he had painted nothing except now and then a dab in the line of commerce or advertising. He earned a little by serving as a model for those young artists in the colonies who could not pay the price of a professional. He drank gin to excess and still talked of his coming masterpiece. For the rest, he was a fierce little old man who scoffed terribly at softness in anyone, and who regarded himself as a special mastiff in waiting to protect the 2 young artists in the studio above. Sue found Bremen smelling strongly of juniper berries and his dimly lighted den below. In one corner was a blank canvas on the easel that had been waiting for 25 years to receive the first line of a masterpiece. She told him of Jonesy's fancy, and how she feared she would indeed, light and fragile as a leaf herself, float away when her slight hold on the world grew weaker. Old Bremen, with his red eyes plainly streaming, shouted his contempt and derision for such idiotic imaginings. "Was," he cried, "ist der people in the world mit Der foolishness to die before leaves they drop off from a confounded vine? I have not heard of such a thing. No, I will not pose as model for a fool hermit bounderhead. Why do you allow that silly, confounded thing to enter her brain? Ach, das poor little Missy Yonsey. She is very ill and weak, said Sue, and the fever has left her mind morbid and full of strange fancies. Very well, Mr. Bremen. If you do not care to pose for me, you needn't. But I think you are a horrid old man. You are just like a woman, yelled Bremen. Who said I will not pose? Go on, I commit you. For half an hour I have been trying to say that I am ready to pose. This is not any blank in which one so good as Miss Yonsey shall lie sick. One day I will bend a masterpiece and will show all a world. Jonesy was sleeping when they went upstairs. Sue pulled the shade down at the window-sill and motioned Bremen into the other room. In there they peered out the window fearfully at the vine. Then they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. A persistent cold rain was falling, mingled with snow. Bremen, in his old blue shirt, took his seat as a hermit miner on an upturned kettle for a rock. When Sue awoke from an hour's sleep the next morning, she found Jonesy with dull, wide-opened eyes, staring at the drawn green shade. "Put it up, I want to see," she ordered in a whisper. Wearily Sue obeyed. But lo! After the beating rain and fierce gusts of wind that had endured through the livelong night, there yet stood, one against the brick wall, one ivy leaf. It was the last on the vine, still dark green near its stem, but with its edges tinted with the yellow of desolation and decay. It hung bravely from a branch 20 feet above the ground. "It is the last one," said Jonesy. "I thought it would surely fall down in the night. I heard the wind howling like crazy. It will fall today. I shall die at the time." "Dear, dear," said Sue, leaning her worn face down on the pillow. "Think of me. If you won't think of yourself, what would I do?" But Jonesy did not answer. The lonesome thing in all the world is a soul when it's making ready to go on its mysterious far journey. The fancy seemed to possess her more strongly, as one by one the ties that bound her to friendships and to the earth were loosened. The day wore away, and even through the twilight they could see the lone ivy leaf clinging to its stem against the wall. And then, with the coming of the night, the north wind was again loosed, while the rain still beating against the windows and pattered down from the low Dutch eaves. When it was light enough, Jonesy, the merciless, commanded that the shade be raised. The ivy leaf was still there. Jonesy lay for a long time looking at it, and then she called to Sue, who was stirring her chicken broth over the gas stove. "I've been a bad girl," said Jonesy. "Something has made that last leaf stay there, to show me how wicked I was. It is a sin to want to die. You may bring me a little broth now, and some milk with a little port in it. And, no, bring me a hand mirror first, and then pack some pillows up against my back. I will sit up and watch you cook." An hour later she said, "Sudie, some day I hope to paint the Bay of Naples." The doctor came in the afternoon, and Sue had an excuse to go into the hallway as he left. "Even chances," said the doctor, taking Sue's thin, shaky hand in his. "With good nursing you'll win. And now I must see another case I have downstairs. Bremen, his name is. Some kind of an artist, I believe. Pneumonia, too. He's an old, weak man, and the attack is acute. There's no hope for him. but he goes to the hospital today to be made more comfortable. The next day the doctor said to Sue, "She's out of danger. You've won. Nutrition and care now, that's all." And that afternoon Sue came to the bed where Jonesy lay, contentedly knitting a very blue and very useless woolen shoulder scarf, and put one arm round her pillow and all. "I have something to tell you, little mouse," she said. "Mr. Bremen died of pneumonia today, in the hospital. He was ill only 2 days. The janitor found him on the morning of the first day in his room, downstairs, helpless with pain. His shoes and clothing were wet through the icy cold. They couldn't imagine where he had been on such a dreadful night. And then they found a lantern, still lighted, and a ladder that had been dragged from its place, and some scattered brushes, and a palette with green and yellow colors mixed in it. And look out the window, dear, at that last ivy leaf on the wall. Didn't you wonder why it never fluttered or moved when the wind blew? Ah, darling, it's Bremen's masterpiece. He painted it there the night that the last leaf fell." The badge of Policeman O'Roon. It cannot be denied that men and women have looked upon one another for the first time and become instantly enamored. It is a risky process, this love at first sight, before she has seen him on Brad Street or he has seen her in curl papers. But these things do happen, and one instance must form a theme for this story, though not, thank heavens, too overshadowing of more vital and important subjects, such as drink, policemen, horses, and earldoms. During a certain war, a troop calling itself the Gentle Riders rode into history. The Gentle Riders were recruited from the aristocracy of the wild men of the West and the wild men of aristocracy of the East. In khaki, there is little telling them one from another, so they became good friends and comrades all round. Ellsworth Remsen, whose old Knickerbocker descent atoned for his modest rating at only 10 million, he was eating happily the canned beef at the campfire of the Gentle Riders. The war was a great lark to him, so that he scarcely regretted polo and plank shade. One of the troops was a well-set-up, affable, cool young man who called himself O'Roon. To this young man Remsen took an especial liking. The two rode side by side during the famous mooted uphill charge. There was dispute so hotly at the time by the Spaniards and afterwards by the Democrats. After the war, Remsen came back to his polo. One day a well-set-up, affable, cool young man disturbed him at his club, and he and O'Roon were soon pounding each other and exchanging opprobrious epitaphs after the manner of the long-lost friends. O'Roon looked seedy and out of luck and perfectly contented, but it seemed that his content was only apparent. "Get me a job, Remsen," he said. "I've just handed a barber my last shilling." "No trouble at all," said Remsen. "I know a lot of men who have banks and stores and things downtown. Any particular line you'd fancy?" "Yes," said O'Roon, with a look of interest. "I took a walk in your Central Park this morning. I'd like to be one of those bobbies on horseback. That would be about the ticket. Besides, it's the only thing I can do. I can ride a little, and fresh air suits me." "Thank you. And could you land it for me, please?" Remsen was sure that he could, and in a very short time he did, and they were not above looking at mounted policemen, might have seen a well-set-up, affable, cool young man on a prancing chestnut steed attending to his duties along the driveways of the parks. And now, at the extreme risk of wearying old gentlemen who carry leather fob chains, and elderly ladies who, but no, grandmother herself yet thrills at the foolish, immortal Romeo, there must be a hint of love at first sight. It came just as Rinson was strolling in Fifth Avenue from his club a few doors away. A motor car was creeping along foot by foot, impeded by a freshet of vehicles that filled the street. In the car was a chauffeur and an old gentleman with snowy side whiskers and a Scotch plaid cap, which could not be worn without automobiling except by a personage. Not even a wine agent would dare do it, but these two were on no conquests except perhaps for the guiding of the machine and the paying for it. And the old gentleman's side sat a young lady more beautiful than pomegranate blossoms, more exquisite than the first quarter moon viewed at twilight through the tops of oleanders. Rimson saw her and knew his fate. He could have flung himself under the very wheels that conveyed her, but he knew that would be the least means of attracting the attention of those who rode in the motor car. Slowly the auto passed, and we placed the poets above the autoists, carried the heart of Rimson with it. Here was a large city of millions, and many women who at a certain distance appeared to resemble pomegranate blossoms, yet he hoped to see her again, for each one fancies that his romance has its own tutelary guardian and divinity. Luckily for Rimson's peace of mind, there came a diversion in the guise of a reunion of the gentle riders of the city. There were not many of them, perhaps a score, and there was a wassail and things to eat, and speeches, and Spaniards was bearded again in recapitulation, and when daylight threatened them, the survivors prepared to depart. But some remained upon the battlefield. One of these was Trooper O'Roon, who was not seasoned to potent liquids. His legs declined to fulfill the obligations they had sworn to the police department. "I'm stewed, Rimson," said O'Roon to his friend. "Why do they build hotels that go round and round like Catherine wheels? They'll take away my shield and break me. I can think and talk consecutively, but I stammer with my feet. I've got to go on duty in 3 hours. The jig is up, Rimson." "The jig is up, I tell you." "Look at me," said Rimson, who was his smiling self, pointing to his own face. "Whom do you see here?" "Good fellow," said O'Roon dizzily. "Good old Rimson." "Not so," said Rimson. "You see mounted policemen, O'Roon." "Look at your face. No, you can't do that without a glass, but look at mine and think of yours. How much alike are we? As 2 French tables at dinner. With your badge on your horse, in your uniform, will I charm nursemaids and prevent the grass from growing under people's feet in the park this day? I will have your badge and your honor, besides having the jolliest lark I've been blessed with since we licked Spain, promptly on time. The counterfeit presentment of mounted policeman O'Roon, single-footed into the park on his chestnut steed, and a uniform 2 men who are unlike will look alike. 2 who somewhat resemble each other in feature and figure will appear to be twin brothers. So Rimson trotted down the bridle path, enjoying himself hugely. So few real pleasures do 10 millionaires have. Along the driveway in the early morning spun a victoria drawn by a pair of fiery bays. There was something foreign about the affair, for the park is rarely used in the morning, except by unimportant people, who love to be healthy, poor, and wise. In the vehicle sat an old gentleman with snowy side whiskers and a Scotch plaid cap, which could not be worn while driving, except by a personage. At this side sat the lady of Rimson's heart, the lady who had looked like pomegranate blossoms. Rimson met them coming, and at that instant their passing her eyes looked into his, but for the ever-coward's heart of a true lover, he could have sworn that she flushed a faint pink. He trotted on for 20 yards and then wheeled his horse at the sound of a runaway hoof. The bays had bolted. Remsen sent his chestnut after Victoria like a shot. There was work cut out for the impersonator of Policeman O'Roon. The chestnut ranged alongside the off-bay 30 seconds after the chase began, rolled his eyes back at Remsen, and said in the only manner open to policeman horses, "Well, you duffer, are you going to do your share? You're not, O'Roon, but it seems to me if you're lean to the right you could reach the reins of that foolish show-running bay, ah? You're all right, O'Roon. Couldn't you have done it more neatly?" The runaway team was tugged to an inglorious halt by Remsen's tough muscles. The driver released the hands from the wrapped reins and jumped from his seat and stood at the head of the team. The chestnut approved his new rider, danced and pranced, reveling eloquently the subdued bays. Remsen, lingering, was dimly conscious of a vague, impossible, unnecessary old gentleman in a Scotch cap who talked incessantly about something, and he was acutely conscious of the pair of violet eyes that would have drawn St. Pierrettes from his iron pile, or whatever the illusion is, and the lady's smile, and a look, a little frightened, but a look that, with ever-coward heart of true lover, he could not yet construe. They were asking his name, and bestowing upon him well-bred thanks for his heroic deed, and the Scotch cap was especially babbling and insistent. But the eloquent appeal was in the eyes of the lady. A little thrill of satisfaction ran through Remsen, because he had a name to give which, without undue pride, was worthy of being spoken in high places, and a small fortune which, with due pride, he could leave at his end without disgrace. He opened his lips to speak and closed them again. Who was he? Mounted Policeman O'Roon? The badge and the honor of his comrade were in his hands. If Ellsworth Remsen, 10-millionaire, and Knickerbocker had just rescued Pomegranate Blossom and Scotch Cap from possible death, where was Policeman O'Roon? Off his beat, exposed, disgraced, discharged. Love had come, but before that there had been something that demanded precedence, the fellowship of men and battlefields fighting an alien foe. Remsen touched his cap, looked between the chestnut eyes, and took refuge. "Don't mention it," he said solidly. "We policemen are paid to do these things. It's our duty." And he rode away, cursing nobleness, but knowing he could never have done anything else. At the end of the day, Remsen sent the chestnut to his stable and went to O'Roon's room. The policeman was again a well-set-up, affable, cool young man who sat by the window smoking a cigar. "I wish you and the rest of the police force and all the badges, horses, brass buttons, and men who can't hold their liquor—" He did not finish his sentence. O'Roon smiled with evident satisfaction. "Good old Remsen," he said affably. "I know all about it. They trailed me down and cornered me here 2 hours ago. There was a little row at the home, you know, and I cut sticks just to show them. I don't think I told you that my governor was the Earl of Ardsley. Funny you should bob against them in the park. If you damage that horse of mine, I'll never forgive you. I'm going to buy him and take him back with me. Oh, yes, and I think my sister, Lady Angela, you know, wants particularly for you to come up to the hotel with me this evening. Didn't lose my badge, did you, Remsen? I've got to turn that in at headquarters when I resign." The end. The next book we're going to read is called Understood Betsy, and it's a recommendation by my sister, who read it when she was a young girl. So we will both be discovering it together, but I flipped through it and it seems like a pretty funny book. So join me for that next.